Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, April 8th, 2020. Time for yet another show in the time of the coronavirus. Plenty to catch up on. No way we'll fit it all in there. Another visit scheduled with Greg Dworkin later on in this hour, and we'll catch up on all of his news and views on that news in just a few minutes. Lots, as I said, happening today, and I'm beginning to wonder about some of the things that are happening and some of the things we have talked about a little bit. More evidence still pouring in of shipments of the personal protective equipment, ventilators, masks, hand sanitizers, anything that's of any value in fighting the coronavirus plague being seized in some cases, here in the United States anyway, ostensibly by the federal government, but no one will say why or where it's going, and being seized overseas from other governments or from the hands of shippers getting ready to send it to other governments around the world, but with no explanation of exactly who it is who's seizing these goods in the first place. No, nothing more than an identification that they are somehow American or American affiliated, because that's where the goods are ending up being shipped. But no official word as to who's doing this or under what authority. So still a big mystery. The president apparently continues to try to promote the, what he views as the miracle drug, the hydroxychloroquine, if I have that pronunciation correct. Still wondering, by the way, just like everything else, I always ask for the documentation for any Trump claim. He did claim the other day that he was maybe sort of kind of almost ready to actually take it himself, even though he says he was exhibiting no symptoms of the disease. And I'm just wondering when we'll get confirmation that he took it, or why he's not taking it on live television, since he insists on putting himself there every day. I suppose that would be the ultimate confidence booster in the safety of the drug for large numbers of people to take it outside of the supervision of a doctor and for no apparent reason as a prophylactic, I guess, against COVID-19, because he's promoting it for that reason as well, even though I don't think anybody's studying it at all for those purposes. But of course, he's not going to do it because I think he's still getting enough advice that it actually poses a fairly serious health risk to take it for reasons other than the indications given on the label and outside of a doctor's care, and for no particular reason. So far, he hasn't had the guts to do that, and not likely that he ever will. And I guess if you're considering either taking it yourself or drinking your fish tank, I would keep that in mind. The fact that you've never seen the president simply pop some of those pills and wash it down, maybe with like some Flint tap water, to indicate to you that it's all safe and all good. So, I don't know. I would watch out for that. I'd keep an eye out for that. All right, let's see. What other items might we want to bring up first thing in the morning here? There was an interesting article about that this morning. Maybe I can just stick with that subject for just a moment. Paul Waldman, no relation, of course, put out this article yesterday with a different take on it. I know we've all been trained at this point to think first of what might be the financial motive for Trump to be so interested in promoting this drug. And there was some indication that there might be one, but I also saw, and I think I pocketed some tweets from Walter Schaub, is that right, who was cautioning or counseling caution, I guess we could say, on that subject, and saying the financial interest in this particular company is actually pretty minor. So it may be, though, that Paul Waldman has found a reason outside of the financial for him to be promoting this, which is, to sum it all up quickly, in his first paragraph or so, or at least in his tweets about his piece, it's that Trump needs a miracle. This thing is falling apart, and it's gotten away from him, and it's increasingly obvious every day with another report out in the last day or so about, or another report of another report that Trump ignored, which was attempting to, flag his attention for the emerging pandemic risk. And once again, he ignored it and downplayed it once it did make itself apparent. So the mounting evidence that he's simply asleep at the switch is incredible. And I guess maybe all he's got left is the possibility that if this thing somehow works out to be helpful in any way whatsoever, he'll now be able to say, see, I knew better than even the doctors. I really know this stuff. The doctors are all amazed at how much I know about medicine. They say, how do you know about this? And the answer is, I watch television and somebody said I should say this, so I said it. That's kind of where we stand. But here's how Paul Waldman puts it. One of the most bizarre and disturbing aspects of President Trump's nightly press briefings on the coronavirus pandemic is when he turns into a drug salesman. Like a cable TV pitchman hawking male enhancement pills, Trump regularly extols the virtues of taking hydroxychloroquine, a drug used to treat malaria and lupus, and I understand some forms of arthritis as well, as a potential game changer that might just cure COVID-19. He loves to pretend that he's got information that indicates that that's so. On Saturday, he even said, I think people should, if it were me, and it could be him, right? In fact, I might do it anyway. I may take it, okay? I may take it. I'm not only, as Paul puts it here, the president of Hair Club for Men. I'm also a client, right? Why isn't he doing it? Why aren't we hearing about it? But the evidence that hydroxychloroquine could actually be an effective treatment is at this point extremely thin. Might it be some kind of aid in treating the disease for some patients? Yes, it's possible, but Trump's enthusiasm for it, oh yes, we had some sound effects for that too, but the sound effect board is not
enthusiasms.
There we are. Some enthusiasms, I guess, for it, so out of proportion, though, Trump's enthusiasm is, and so relentless that one has to ask what the heck is going on here. Some people are inclined to believe that Trump must have a financial motive, and the New York Times did report that he owns some stock in Sanofi. I'm not certain how they pronounce it, Sanofi, a company that makes the name brand version of the drug, but I doubt that's what's at work. Instead, I think there are two reasons Trump is working so hard to convince everyone that it's a miracle cure, neither of which are about Trump's own bank account. The first is that Trump is listening to all the wrong people. We know that he finds those with advanced degrees extremely intimidating, activating his contempt and envy for experts. So when all the doctors and public health experts and epidemiologists tell him that while we can look into the potential of the drug, there's no reason to think it'll actually be transformative, and that makes him more, not less, convinced that it must be spectacular. Trump compensates for his own insecurity by working to convince himself and everyone else that the experts don't know what they're talking about, and he knows more than them about everything. As he said in an appearance at the CDC, every one of these doctors said, how do you know so much about this? Maybe I have a natural ability. The scientists standing with him neither burst out in laughter nor began weeping uncontrollably, a tribute to their self-control, but no help to the rest of us, I would add. So who is he listening to? Here's an excerpt from a recent New York Times article that says Trump first expressed interest in the drug a few weeks ago, telling associates that Mr. Larry Ellison, or as he said, he just said Mr. Ellison. They had to include the Larry in brackets here. A billionaire and a founder of Oracle had discussed it with him. At the time, Dr. Oz, the host of television's Dr. Oz show, was in touch with Mr. Trump's advisors about expediting approval to use the drug for the coronavirus. Mr. Giuliani, that's Rudy, of course, has urged Mr. Trump to embrace the drug based in part on the advice of Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, a self-described simple country doctor. And by the way, ask yourself what country, because as it turns out, Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, to no one's surprise, given that Rudy Giuliani knows who he is originally Ukrainian. That's not included here, but just thought I might throw that out there. Giuliani still hasn't dropped his obsession with Ukraine. A self-described simple country doctor who has become a hit on conservative media after administering a cocktail of hydroxychloroquine, the antibiotic azithromycin, and zinc sulfate. So, Trump is getting his medical advice from CEOs, a TV doctor who's been assailed for promoting quack treatments, and Giuliani. One of Giuliani's main sources of information on this topic, by the way, is a guy who runs a company providing medical supplies, that's good, to cruise ships, that's shady, and who was once sentenced to a year in jail for extorting Steven Seagal. So that's definitely shady. It doesn't really count as a qualification for recommending pharmaceuticals for the treatment of a novel coronavirus. All right, well, we can stop with it there. I think the other main thesis of this thing, we blurted out right at the top, Trump needs a miracle, and this is the only one he's got left in his bag. And that's the only thing he thinks could save him come November. So that's what he's going to promote. Whether it's good for people, bad for people, or will kill them, doesn't appear to make a difference to him. Now, Greg Dworkin is here. Let's just switch right over. Hi, Greg. How you doing today?
Hey, so I'm not a cardiologist.
Okay.
I don't play one on the internet.
Right? What the hell? Yeah.
But the problem is that hydroxychloroquine is being used with azithromycin, and when you use the drugs together or either drug alone, they potentially have cardiac arrhythmia issues. And so both in Sweden
who needs a heart? And
in a French study, and this piece that I just put up for you from the Mayo Clinic, all say the same thing, which is basically you really have to be careful about cardiac side effects with this medication. Do not do this at home. The idea that Trump would claim that maybe I will consider taking it is just yet another con job as he tries to sell you Trump steaks.
Yes.
Probably for politics, not necessarily for personal gain in this particular case. Giuliani is in it for the money, but Trump just wants to show that he's smarter than everybody else and has some sort of plan in mind, which is going to save the world. Just trust me. Yeah. Which of course nobody does. But the point of all of that is that we don't know whether this medication cocktail actually helps. And we do know that whereas 90% of the public can take it safely, the 10% who have severe arrhythmias are severe enough that it really needs to be done in controlled settings, with like real doctors actually, watching what's going on. So it's not a panacea. It's not for everybody. Whether it works or not is unclear. And the only reason Trump is pushing it is because he wants to show the world that he's in charge and smarter than the doctors. So, just hope that's clear.
Yeah, I think that pretty much lays it out. Like I said, the solution for it, if he's totally confident in it, is obvious. No one should be able to stop him. He should just pop them out, take the pills right there on TV. I mean, I haven't seen him do it.
He said he might, which is not the same thing as he will.
Right.
He says a lot of things that might happen that don't in fact happen.
Yes, that's
and it's mostly due for distraction. And of course, a lot of this comes from his increasingly ridiculous and somewhat boring 1.5 hour so-called updates.
Yes.
Which, I stopped watching the whole thing. I watched the first few minutes to see if he's going to stay or whether he's going to go and hand it over to Birx and Fauci, which he hasn't done in a couple of days now. And for an hour, he just babbles. I mean, it's incredible. Yesterday, there was no news whatsoever. In fact, the only news was when he decided he wanted to try and make news and immediately walked back and said, I don't like the way WHO is doing this. I may defund them. Well, I'm not really going to do that, but I might. And when somebody asked him, you're going to do that in the middle of a crisis? He said, well, I'm not going to do that, but, I might. Right. Because I'm not happy with them. I mean, it's all garbage. Yes. That is not worth covering live. The networks continue, not the networks, but the cable networks continue to do that. But then again, they're starved for eyeballs. So
I guess so. He could test it out on Boris Johnson. And has said he's calling Boris Johnson to tell him you should try this stuff.
Well, Boris Johnson is in the ICU. I don't know if he's taking calls.
He might not be. Yeah.
Let's have a long phone call. Yeah. I'm short of breath. I can't take a long phone call. Yeah. Well, text me.
Or he's having oxygen therapy, which we're not entirely sure what it means. They just mean it's not the bad stuff.
Yeah, they put a nasal cannula in his nose, and if that's not enough, they'll give him a face mask, and if that's not enough, they'll give him a rebreather mask, and if that's not enough, they'll consider intubating him. But there's some other studies out saying intubation isn't always the best thing. Maybe you should wait a long time on it. And most people don't like being on vents, and so they'll if he's still with it, he'll say don't do that if you don't have to. So what's happening with him, we don't know. But at his age and his weight, and the fact that he's in the ICU at all is bad news.
Yes.
Only sick people wind up in that situation. So are the British press underplaying this? Probably.
Well, they've only got
the
so
U.S.
much
press the
information.
only press that gets stories wrong and sticks to the government line way too long in the process? No. BBC and other government agencies do that too.
Yep.
So, we don't know what's going on there, and we're just going to have to wait a couple of days to find out. But I think it's pretty safe to say, if you're talking about either Boris Johnson's government or Donald Trump's government, you're probably being lied to.
In most cases, yes. By which I mean everything. All cases.
Well, it's difficult because, one of the main things in a public health emergency is you want to be able to trust, individuals who are talking to you. And that's, of course, where Tony Fauci comes in. And for all his flaws, like not correcting Trump to his face in public, and ripping his heart out and eating it, so everybody could see it, like in one of those Indiana Jones movies. Except for not doing that, Fauci's doing a pretty good job.
Right. Now, he could start doing that.
Fauci, I do. And they're both, they've worked together for years and years and years. This is all, this is how you survive in Washington, by being apolitical while being very political. It's the John Bolton school of how I get by.
Yes.
And Bolton, of course, has a reputation not of being a super smart, analyst, except if you're a neocon. But everybody grants that he's a super smart behind the scenes, I know how to fight the bureaucracy stuff.
Yes.
Which, of course, was nonsense, because when it came push to shove, where's his book?
Yeah, right. That's true. He didn't win in the policy arena, and he
didn't win that either, and now nobody even talks about him, and it's like old news, and who cares?
Yeah, he did try to muscle back in the middle of this thing, and no one was interested.
Right. I mean, the only interesting part is he's the one who was in charge of cutting the pandemic response team from the National Security Council.
Didn't help him.
You can have a reputation built up over decades of being a good political infighter, and it falls apart when you lose. And so, Birx certainly more than Fauci is in that situation, but Birx works directly for Trump in this setting, whereas Fauci still works for NIH and is lending his expertise to CDC. It's not quite the same situation, not quite the same scenario. In any case, where are we at? Well, it looks like in New York City, maybe Connecticut, maybe New Jersey, there's glimmers of hope that maybe the curve is beginning to flatten a little bit. Again, we have to emphasize, it's not a peak in the traditional sense that you see a spike in one of these graphs. It's more like a plateau. One of those, westerns in the distance there. And the peak can last 8-10 days, and you need a lot more data to really know what's going on. The issues in terms of trying to track things is some things you can do accurately, like how many admissions are there in the emergency room, or are the emergency rooms overflowing, or how many people die in the hospital. There's things you can't necessarily do accurately. Are all those deaths due to coronavirus? We don't know, because not all the deaths are tested. A lot of them are. But up to 10 times the normal amount of people are dying at home in New York, and they're not necessarily being tested. So if you don't know the numerator, which is how many people die, and you don't know the denominator, which is how many people have the virus, and you really don't know what the case fatality rate is, and you don't really know exactly what's going on, you sort of have an idea. And the best way, which is the safest because it doesn't rely on testing, is to look at hospitalization rates, ICU rates, and that's what the University of Washington model does when it looks at what's going to happen in your individual state, and that's the best case scenario model that the feds are using right now. There's other models out there that are worse. And so when people say, well, I think it's peaking, what they're really saying is, I don't think that we're admitting people at a rate that was like a week or two ago. That seems to have slowed down. And that's good news, but that's still a pretty hefty rate, and there's still a lot of people in the hospital. There's still people dying. And so that's important to emphasize. And why would you emphasize such a basic point things are horrible, but they're not getting worse is not the same thing quite as it's getting better. But Fox News is still pushing the idea that, it's not as bad as it looked, and maybe all these deaths are overhyped.
Yeah.
You can find Brett Hume doing that on Twitter. You can find Hannity doing it on television. The weird thing is that, and I had a whole screed about that this morning on Twitter, is I don't think it will last. I mean, for example, this New York Times story from today, coronavirus was slow to spread in rural America, not anymore, I think is very much to the point. You can't hide it when it's actually in your community. So, as this winds up hitting those particular areas, you could expect that, the way it hits you is going to be greater. And that's also true as the economic ramifications, which, as bad as it is, with probable, 10, 15, 20% unemployment right now, the worst stuff still hasn't hit.
Yes, that would be
and people don't understand these 2 points. The bulk of the virus hitting, the bulk of the economic bad news hitting, that hasn't happened yet. As bad as things feel right now.
Economic news even, yeah.
Yeah, because, supply chains drop, and then, states wind up figuring out they don't have as much revenue. Then states have to start laying off people. That increases the unemployment. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's other shoes to drop. That's still going to happen. So, the social distancing is important. Obviously, it can't go on forever, and there's lots of discussions about how to stop it, but now isn't the time. And Fox News pushing people to do it is the worst possible situation. Yes. And that's why you have weird, Republican governors who are still resisting the whole concept of what it is that they're really supposed to be doing.
So, yeah.
Now, politically, I think that everybody's so traumatized about 2016 that they don't want to consider reality. What I mean by that is, what if the end result of this Fox News distortion bubble, downplaying and misleading in a crisis, is dropping trust in Fox News?
Oh, well, that would be.
What if it results in dropping trust in Trump? People are afraid.
Hopefully it should.
To say this, and they all say, "Well, nothing matters. Anything his base is unshakable. This, that, and everything." What if it's not true?
That would be great.
I'm not insisting it happens, but the point is, people are really quick to say, "Well, none of this is going to matter and nothing will change." Well,
they have seen a lot
also
of that.
posit the other end of the Overton window that everything will change. Why don't you do that?
I don't know.
Not to.
Well, yes. I mean,
what if Trump gets crushed in November because everybody hates him because he led to everybody dying?
Well, that would just be normal, like people reacting normally.
Therefore, it's
something
not impossible
we haven't seen in a while.
to consider. But nobody will. Nobody will say it out loud. It's just really weird.
Well, it's I don't know. I mean, I guess it's out of fashion to be hopeful at this point.
Exactly. That's kind of my point. So, any evidence for that? Well, look, he's got shaky numbers. He really has no bump in terms of a rally. New CNN poll out today. I think he's at 44 or something that's not especially impressive. But there are some other numbers that also not so good. Navigator Research, for example, has their tracking poll out today. For the first time in tracking, Democrats in Congress have an edge on who's better at handling coronavirus, 44-42.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Really, the first time?
In the CNN poll from this morning, Trump job approval over handling coronavirus is 45-52, which is a drop. His overall job approval is 44-51, which is decent. Okay, so it's actually a tad up from the last poll when it was 43, so he's at 44. But when you dig in the numbers and you look and see what's going on inside the poll, people are getting very skeptical about how Trump's handling the coronavirus issue, but they still give him good marks in the economy, which gives you an idea that those numbers are on shaky ground, which is something Ron Brownstein was writing the other day. And Gary Langer from ABC, polling guy, looking at the numbers underneath, saying something similar. In fact, if I could put my hands on it, Tom Edsall had a piece back on April 1st, which talked a little bit about the polling. And I'm just going to see if I found the piece. Now I just want to find that one spot, which he's got like these articles go on forever and ever and ever.
Well,
he's got Jonathan Haidt, he's got Gary Langer, he's got a whole bunch of other people, but underneath are really shaky numbers about how you think the government performance is, and that just takes a while to sink back into actual approval. In fact, one of the startling things in the CNN poll was noting that it's like, again, I don't have these numbers directly in front of me, but it's very close to this, that white non-college approved of Trump's handling of coronavirus 62%, whereas white college disapproved of it 62%, exact same thing. And again, when it hits the rural areas, because a lot of these polls have this lag time, they're really looking at last week's and 2 weeks ago's data in terms of how it hits in people's head. When it hits the rural areas, that's going to change.
Okay. I mean,
so we had this election yesterday, and we don't know what the results are going to be. And for those wanting to know who won in Wisconsin, we're not going to know till Monday. It was probably the Republican. That's usually what happens when they rig elections in Wisconsin. But we're not going to know the results till Monday.
Okay. Well, then we can wait until after the weekend to call Waukesha County about that.
Today's only Wednesday, but it's a question of the absentee ballots coming in. And usually what happens is the Democrats win the absentee ballots and the Republicans win the same day. And that's probably especially true yesterday because they closed all but 5 of 180 polling places in Milwaukee City.
Yeah.
Where the Democrats voted.
Right.
So the heroes who went out and voted because they felt it was their duty are wonderful people, but that's just overwhelming odds.
Yes, and we hope that, we'll have to check in on their health for the next 2 weeks and see that everybody stays healthy, and I hope that that's the case. We saw some initial figures. I don't know whether they're verified about how many people have turned out to vote. Bad news. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. Greg Dworkin still with us. We're still trying to figure out whether there's any numbers to be had about turnout in, all over Wisconsin, really. I've seen some numbers floated, but I have no real source for it that makes me feel good about the numbers. But what have you?
Well, I got a source.
Okay, excellent. Let's try yours.
This is Craig Gilbert, who's Washington bureau chief for Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and JS Online. And he writes the Wisconsin Voter Blog, and he's into this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So Milwaukee County is different than Milwaukee City. But Milwaukee County took a big jump in absentee ballots returned in today's data from 125,000 to 152,000, and about 56,000 of those are City of Milwaukee. And that's a higher than the total votes cast by Milwaukee County in 2019 court race. So there's more absentee ballots this year than there was last year.
That makes a lot of sense. You would expect that. Or
we don't know what the in-person numbers are, but we do know the absentee ballots now top 1 million. 1.2 million were sent out. And 1 million were returned. So most of the people who got absentee ballots returned them. The problem was you couldn't get them.
Yes, right. A lot of people who made applications and waited for weeks and said they got nothing. So that's
right. So, for example, the City of Milwaukee, the turnout was 75,000, including Election Day. And that'll grow as more absentees come in. That's City of Milwaukee.
All right.
And that's a Democratic area. And it seems low, but there's really no analogs or no analogies, no analog in past Aprils to compare, says Craig Gilbert. It's pretty poor compared to peak elections of 2016 and 2004, but it's pretty good compared to 08 and 2012 mayor races and most Supreme Court races.
Okay.
So hard to know. I mean, in 2004, 163,000 people turned out.
Yes.
Right? And for Supreme Court in 2018, 58,000 turned out. And this is 75,000. So what do you compare it to? A Supreme Court race in 2007 got 43,000. So, you can't look at the numbers and know much of anything.
Yes. Here's this confirmation for the numbers that you came up with. The original source that I saw retweeting these ridiculously low numbers now has in their tweet thread a correction to basically the numbers that you just gave us, about 75,000 ballots cast in Milwaukee, which is, I was going to say it sounds kind of low, and it's low compared to what I had earlier heard was the norm, but I earlier heard what was the norm from the same guy who gave the completely wrong answer earlier. So, all right, well, I don't know, it may be that this other person is saying 75,000 because he saw what you just saw. But that sounds a lot more likely.
Don't predict. We really don't know what's going to happen. The most likely outcome is the Democrats did okay in the absentee ballots, got screwed out of some absentee ballots because they didn't get them in time, and they had to be postmarked yesterday, but they could still arrive by the 13th, and that's why we won't know until the 13th, and that's why we won't know until next week.
Okay.
The odds are that the Republicans are going to squeak through. That's typically what happens in these elections. But these aren't typical times, so we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay, I will wait. And lots of people really have nothing to do but wait.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So let's see what other stories we could tell you.
It's probably not.
Here's a good one. Stop undermining health policy with misinformation. Let's agree we don't know enough, and we do know a lot. This is by my Yale medical doctor friend, Howard Foreman, the Howie on Twitter. And he often posts updates of what's going on all over the world with coronavirus. But there are some contrarian theories about what's going on here. In the Wall Street Journal, professors Aaron Ben-David and Jay Bhattacharya argued that COVID-19 fatality rate is closer to 0.01%, which would make it 1/10 of the flu mortality rate. That's crazy talk. Here's the problem. We don't know what the true death rate really is. I think I mentioned people are dying at home in New York and not getting measured. And also, we're not going in and measuring the nursing homes. The ones we do, everybody has it.
Yeah.
And the ones we don't know. So case fatality rate, way too early to do that, but you still have to collect the data and make the best decisions based on what we have. This is an interesting political analysis article from Josh Kraushaar from National Journal. And this one is called The Republican Divide Over Coronavirus. And basically what he's saying is, this isn't a Democratic-Republican thing. You can pretty much know where the Democrats are, and they're pretty united on this. But the Republicans, basically, it's the difference between whether you are one of those Republicans who represents the suburbs, in which case you're Mike DeWine, at least in spirit,
Larry Hogan,
or Larry Hogan, or whether you're one of those Republicans that represents the rural areas, in which case you're Tate Reeves. Or Ron DeSantis. Yes, Florida has all sorts of stuff, but in terms of spirit and where you're looking at,
real Florida.
Are you the rural libertarian, keep government away from me type of Republican? Then you're not going to resist anything.
Yes.
That asks you to actually act.
Right.
And they're losing. And what Kraushaar is making the point of is that the coronavirus is just upending that. And he says the problem is that some Republicans face politically is this individualistic ideology runs counter to the public mood of the country right now, which is a takes a village moment of shared sacrifice. This is a conservative Josh Kraushaar saying this.
I see.
At a time when acting in one's individual interests could jeopardize the health of others. That could change if the economic burden worsens, but right now the public is overwhelmingly supportive of the government's measures to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus, and because the governors, for the most part, outside of the 7 or 8 who haven't done that, are pretty in tune with that as well. That's one of the reasons why there's, quote, support, end quote, shaky as it is, for Trump's approach, because it's not really his approach, it's the governor's approach.
Yes.
So libertarian-minded Republicans, crash our rights, would be well served to pivot away from a posture of resistance and toward a constructive plan for how to reopen the economy when the pandemic subsides. It's time to embrace Fauci and Birx, not ignore it. It's the only politically feasible strategy when Americans of all backgrounds are worried about their lives and their livelihoods. And so what I'm saying is that kind of thinking still hasn't caught up with the rest of the Republican Party. And when it does, I think that as well as when the numbers start to hit in terms of what's going on with the rural areas, that's when I expect things to change in terms of Trump's approval, which isn't great right now, but I expect it to fall even further. It's not going to go up.
All right. Yeah, I've been having questions about what would be the impact in the rural areas, given, I mean, we've had some pretty good success with
the hospitals have already collapsed. You know, a lot of them have closed, and a lot of the western states, you just fly everybody to the big, state hospital. That's not going to work.
Prior to the pandemic, you mean?
Who's going to fly you?
Yeah, that's true. It's a good question.
And there's going to be room at the other end, so all sorts of stuff.
I don't know.
That are going to have impacts that people haven't really figured out. So, part of the question is what's going to happen to America when things really hit? Is it going to be a LOL, nothing matters, we're just the same as we were, only now we're out of work? I doubt that. Part of the reason I was on a screed about not being willing to consider Trump getting crushed doesn't mean he'll get crushed. I'm not predicting that. What I'm saying is that you have to get out of this whole way of thinking that, well, everything that happened after November 2016 is frozen. It's stuck. It's chiseled in rock, and it can't change. And so we're going to be that way forever. And tomorrow's always going to be yesterday. And it's Groundhog Day in America. And I just don't believe that. I think this is a twin hit of such magnitude, of such great proportions. It's shaking up all of that. And it's just going to take a while for that to really, resonate. And the aftershocks are still going to be felt for a while to go. So this Tom Edsel article starts to get into that and goes back to Weimar Germany and says, well, how big a upheaval are we really talking about?
Okay.
The severe economic recession in Weimar Germany in the early 1930s led not only, quote, to an increase in support for the Nazi Party, but also for the Communist Party. Just as the economic collapse in Greece at the start of the last decade increased support for both Communist and National Socialist parties there. So Jonathan Haidt, who's a professor of psychology at NYU, somebody I like to read, argued by email that if we had good leadership, a president who could unify the country and turn our shared adversity into social solidarity, trust, and cooperation, we could look to past national crises such as World War II and the boost it gave to social capital. But we don't have that. In fact, the marker of our political sickness is that taking the virus seriously has become itself a marker of tribal identity. And Mark Hetherington, Weiler and Hetherington wrote a book about authoritarian tendencies in U.S. politics, which I often quote. And I interviewed Jonathan Weiler for Daily Kos on this book. Yeah. But Hetherington writes, a political scientist at the University of North Carolina told me by email that there were two reasons this moment holds a potential to resuscitate negative feelings that Americans have had about government. First, if the government actually succeeds in keeping the carnage to a minimum, it's unlikely to change much. Americans already think government can do this. If the government doesn't succeed, and I think there's every reason to think it'll struggle, it has a potential to further undermine trust in government. People already don't trust it to redistribute money and provide certain services, which is bad. But if they come to think it's not competent to keep us safe, it's even worse. Yes. Now, Republicans have internalized what used to be a political strategy, which increases the chances that government will fail.
Yes.
Which, pretty much is Donald Trump in a nutshell. We need a businessman in there. He's guaranteed to fail. You see, I told you, you can't trust government.
Well, yes. And he's also engineering the failure of state governments at the same time.
Right. David Autor, an economist at MIT under different circumstances, wrote, it would be easy to tell a story in which this episode causes Americans to remember that the government is indispensable for marshaling expertise, but these are very different circumstances. After 4 decades of successful Republican effort to starve the U.S. government of resources and demonize its experts, our government is less competent, less well-prepared, and less agile than it used to be. Perhaps this event would have restored our faith in government, but the picture's missed at best so far. However,
yes,
I would argue that the one main thing that Tony Fauci is doing, in addition to advising where we should go on all of this based on the scientific expertise and warning against things like hydrochloroquine when it's not proven and it might be dangerous, so it has to be done under controlled circumstances, is being a example, a pillar, if you will, of competence in what government can do. And so his role is phenomenally important, and that's why all this talk about the right wing trying to demonize Fauci and make him part of the deep state and get him fired is so dangerous.
yes.
It isn't just that he's going to kill us all, which is bad enough.
Yeah, right. That's definitely on my bad list.
It's also this.
Yes.
It's that Fauci represents competence in government, and if you try to get rid of him and replace him with Peter Navarro and Larry Kudlow,
Yes.
well, that says everything.
Yeah. Navarro, by the way, recently trying to get in on the act of, I saw it coming too. I don't know how valid that is.
So, all right. So he writes a memo saying, I saw it coming too. Trump ignores it because Trump doesn't read.
Right.
Okay.
So
and then it's reported widely by Axios and the New York Times that Fauci and Navarro argued over hydroxychloroquine, Navarro winning the argument in terms of trying to persuade Trump to push it, losing the argument in terms of like everybody with half a brain thinking Navarro is a complete moron.
Yes.
And those who know him outside of medicine and aren't qualified to talk about medicine, but nonetheless know things about economics, politics, and everything else, said, this is like, Alex Jones comes and argues in your house about something and you're taking his side. Navarro is like a wild-eyed nutcase. So Navarro is not winning the PR argument here. Fauci is way more trusted than Navarro. And so he decides he has to do something about it. So his team leaks this memo that said, I knew about this beforehand, so I may not be a medical doctor. I have a PhD. I'm some other kind of doctor, but I know how to read studies, and I was smart enough to see this coming, and leaks this memo claiming that he had the foresight to tell Trump that this was going on. I don't know what he thought he was going to accomplish with that, because the only thing that does is make Trump look like even more of a moron for not listening to even Peter Navarro, who the way it was framed by the political press is, okay, Trump doesn't listen to experts. We know that. He doesn't read. We know that. He doesn't understand anything. We know that. You can't expect him, and this is why I like to strangle the press sometimes, nobody should expect Trump to actually listen to somebody like Tony Fauci, who only spent 52 years trying to, become an expert so we can tell you stuff. But Peter Navarro, who's a nutcase that Trump listens to, Trump wouldn't even listen to him.
Well, he wrote the thing, if that's the problem. He should have pantomimed it for him, I guess.
Right.
But we're not even sure if he really
even
wrote
Peter
it.
Navarro, who's so crazy that Trump listens to, and we now accept this as normal and don't even think that that's the story. When that's the story. Okay, but we don't even think that's the story. The story is Trump didn't even listen to Peter Navarro. And so that makes Trump look bad. Trump hates looking bad. And so that I don't see how that helps Navarro any.
I don't know. I mean, given that he's been on television arguing the opposite, or at least from the opposite point of view this whole time, I don't know. Why not use all these appearances to say, I saw it, I did warn?
Well, the weird thing, so Trump is doing this pantomime press conference. I don't know what else to call it. It's not real. It's a Potemkin press conference, which is supposed to be a PSA about where we're doing with the coronavirus, but it isn't. It's a campaign rally. Everybody knows that. Even his own team admits that. And he's asked by a reporter, given that Navarro told you this, and given that all these other people warned you, don't you feel like he's still a little bit like, I missed it, I should have done this? And Trump says, no.
Yeah, of course not.
I'm a cheerleader for America. That's my job as president. I'm supposed to lie to you and tell you everything is okay. That's my job. What don't you understand about it? And looking at this is completely surreal, completely cut off from reality. That's not what people are asking for. They're asking in a public health crisis for the truth, which is why nobody trusts him. Even his own base doesn't trust him on this. But he's making the case, no, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Sure. Which,
at every level shows a complete misunderstanding of what his role actually is. But it's another reason why those stupid press conferences should not be covered live. They should be covered, but, in an hour and a half, cut out the 35 seconds of news and show us that.
He should do them by Zoom, and they cut off at 40 minutes. How about that?
Yeah, or somebody should hack it.
Yeah,
but
that's true. Oh, you could Zoom bomb it and get it. That's a lie. It's not true. Oh,
right.
That would be great. Unfortunately, he has the television networks to do it instead. He also used his TV appearance to make the flat assertion that all voting by mail is corrupt, except, of course, the voting by mail that he does, which
and
is
his
right
friends
and
do, and everybody else does. That's okay.
Yes, I mean, he actually just came out. Voting by mail for me is okay because I'm allowed to. He says now all the people who want to do it are also allowed to, but they're frauds and I'm not, which is an amazing thing for him to say.
So, getting back to the Tom Edsall piece, this is a piece entitled
That's why it's really hard to read those things.
COVID-19 is twisting 2020 beyond all recognition. And it's just a warning from the people who study authoritarianism to just keep an eye that when Trump goes ahead and fires all of the inspector generals, there's a lot that can happen going forward that is way too reminiscent of Weimar Germany, and keep an eye on it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a huge story, and I really haven't touched on it yet. When I said 7 now, I mean 7 like yesterday. Whoa, there they are. They're calling in, trying to get back in on the action. But he's been dismissing inspectors general all along, and I think the news yesterday was that he did 7 all at once yesterday, just clearing out anybody who had been held over from the previous administration, anybody who had come up with a finding that was unfavorable in some way to him, everybody on the way out now. And, firing all the inspectors general just as you're handed a, $500 billion slush fund.
With more to come.
Yeah.
Because now the fourth tranche is going to be worked on by the House. Interestingly, the word is that Mitch McConnell doesn't want a single bill. He wants little pieces of bills. And the reason is, if you have a single bill, then you can hold it hostage and say it's must pass, therefore we can put things in here like you have to ensure that we can vote. Or, we want inspector generals to be in writing in law that you can't just go ahead and fire them in this case. So McConnell wants to break it up into little pieces. If he can pass the little pieces one at a time, it becomes much harder to say this is must pass. And therefore you have to, we have to capitulate to those radicals in the House who want good government. So we'll see how that goes. If the House passes their stuff first before McConnell can organize the Senate to piece together different bills, we'll see how that goes. That I throw in your lap. You're more attuned to how that works than I am. But I am just reading from Jake Sherman and other people that that was the current plan, and let's see how that goes.
All right. Well, I will have to see that and analyze it myself. You can share that article or tweet or whatever it was you picked it up from.
Yeah, I'll find it.
And then I'll move right past it because
not necessarily today. I mean, we got tomorrow. We can talk about it tomorrow.
They're not moving anytime soon. They're still all hiding. So.
Right. Meanwhile, Joe Biden has a Make Coronavirus Relief Work for Families and Small Businesses Help Them Now opinion piece in the USA Today. I just mentioned that for those of you who say, where's Joe Biden? How come I never see him? Because actually you just have Trump sort of hanging himself with enough rope right now. You don't really need Joe Biden. But if you want him, there he is in USA Today.
Sure.
We got this great story here, wonderful story, heart-lifting. I always like these human interest stories about the pastor who declared that coronavirus was a hoax and went down to New Orleans and then got coronavirus and died,
Yeah, that's hard. That's uplifting. Yeah. Well, in a way, we're right. It's a dangerous thing, and if you go out...
Pastor who decried hysteria dies after attending Mardi Gras.
Which is another one? A different one? Who's this?
This is from BBC, BBC. A couple of days ago. It could be the same one you were already aware of, but,
there was a Virginia
there was
guy.
a woman who said it was a hoax and died. That was a different story.
Oh, yes.
Right. I'm just trying to make the point that this is going to penetrate into rural America in ways that are unanticipated, because just pretending it isn't true and listening to Fox isn't going to do it for you.
Yes. Oh, so I have seen this guy. He's a Virginian. And, we did see him. He looked like an interesting guy, just not good for medical advice. Great if you liked, music and, I guess, old-time religion. But Not so great as a medical advisor. Well, no problem now, though. He won't give you any more advice.
Right. So there you have it. I mean, it's the fact of the matter is that you can only fight off reality for so long. Speaking of reality, I'm looking at the MSN tracking poll this morning. Just for example, it's got Trump approval 41, disapproval 53, and that's down from the 44-51 that Trump was at its peak. But I was looking at Wisconsin. Today's tracking poll has the Democrat higher than the Republican. Specifically for Trump-Biden, it's 50 Biden, Trump 42. That's an 8-point lead. It was 9 yesterday. But that's Wisconsin. Michigan is 40-51 Biden. Florida is 41-51 Biden. Florida is going to be hit really hard by this in the next coming days. That's the place to watch.
See how it's happening, too.
Also, Michigan, of course. Michigan is 40-51 Biden, but Michigan is going to be a hard-hit place. Louisiana is as well. Trump is leading there still, 40. No, actually, it's 47-46 Biden over Trump in Louisiana today. And that's a place that's going to be hit harder and harder. Now, these numbers aren't
in a hot spot.
Formal. These are not going to be permanent. These are only trends. It doesn't predict what's going to happen later on. But the state of Washington, where it hit hard first, Trump is 33, Biden 59. That may be the future for the rest of the country. Just saying. It's what happens when it hits, because even the moderate Republicans sort of say, well, you underplayed it and look what happened to us. And that hasn't happened to the rest of the country yet. But I'm telling you, this virus is coming.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know. I heard that it wasn't.
Yeah. Something. Well, you know what happened to the guy who said that?
I just did it. What happened to me?
No, not you. That pastor.
Okay. Oh, that one. Yes.
He said it was nothing.
Right. That's true. Well, one of many. And not enough, really, quite honestly. People who said so and in so doing endangered many others are having to actually personally deal with the virus.
Well, let's just encapsulate it for you. I'm going to end with an Atlantic article from David Frum, former Bushy,
yes,
now a never-Trumper. And he's a speechwriter. He writes well. Yes. And let's just give you the headline so you can see where all of this is going. The headline of his piece is, "This is Trump's fault."
So far, so good. End the speech right here, David.
Yeah, the president is failing, and Americans are paying for his failures. I don't take responsibility at all, said President Donald Trump in the Rose Garden on March 13th. These words will probably end up as the epitaph of his presidency, as the single sentence that sums it all up. That's going to be his mission accomplished. Right? Yeah. He fancies himself a wartime president. He's basically losing the war. Trump failed. He's failing. He'll continue to fail. And Americans are paying for his failures. So, it's basically the article in a nutshell. But it's not hard to see. It's not hard to say. And, Trump will kill us all 2020 is going to be the bumper sticker. So I'll leave you with that.
Okay.
And we'll try to round up other things. I had a homework assignment for you, which I've already forgotten.
Oh, yes, right. The bills?
Oh, yeah. How McConnell's going to break up the bill into different pieces. I'll see if I can track that down for you, but we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Okay.
So take care. Wash your hands. Stay home.
Okay.
And, keep track of the polls. Trump's in shaky ground here, and we'll see what happens going forward.
Okay. Right.
Take care.
Well, thank you. You do the same, and we'll check in with you again tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to have an answer ready for you on what the Senate is or is doing or is going to try to do by tomorrow, but we'll be able to wing it, I think, if we at least get a hold of this article. Okay, so let's see. More word from more sources about the seizure, the odd ongoing seizure by the federal government, maybe, sort of, kind of various of the equipment that the states are being forced to procure for themselves. This time from the Los Angeles Times. I guess we'll just add this to the pile. I don't know if we really need to go all the way through this or not. Hospitals say feds are seizing masks and other coronavirus supplies without a word. And we're still sort of supposed to be puzzling over what's happening to all the things that they're seizing. But it seems pretty obvious that, we're being given, they're admitting it outright in some cases. That essentially what's happening is They're simply seizing these goods, saying we need them for the federal stockpile, which is something that has gotten a little bit of extra attention in the last couple of days for various reasons. So we're seizing them. And there's as always, a kernel of truth in there that could, in competent hands, make more sense. If the federal government were stepping into a chaotic multi-state bidding war and seizing these goods in an effort to shut down this chaotic multi-state bidding war and instead coordinate from a national policy level the control of needed supplies and assets and farm them out to where they're most needed based on data and the science that's coming in and being collected on a national level, that would be something that would be a lot easier to understand. But because the Trump administration has insisted all along that they were not doing this and that it wasn't their goal to create a coordinated national policy for these things, but rather that the states should be doing this, it makes no sense whatsoever. This is sort of like what we were describing the other day, that the federal government is often given enormous leeway and granted exceptional powers to do things like this because it's expected that there will be a national coordinated response to these things. And that's why the federal government has the leeway in the courts to get away with things that might be questionable otherwise. But if you are not utilizing those powers to coordinate a national response, but for no reason whatsoever, then there's no reason for courts to recognize and uphold the right, the power of the federal government to make these seizures. But of course, no one's challenging any of them in court. There has been no time, and none of the courts are open anyway, and it'll all be over and done with by the time anyone gets a case filed to begin with. But anyway, more evidence of this from the Los Angeles Times and internationally. Yeah, maybe it's best that we don't dive directly into those articles, but head instead to what this may mean for us in the future, given the fact that everyone seems to be finding the same thing. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, the shorter version of, I guess, what the Los Angeles Times is coming up with was encapsulated in a Wolfram tweet just recently. He's quoting, who's this? Interesting. Identifying here as Nathan Bernhardt with a blue check mark and everything, co-host of Patch Notes at No Cartridge. I couldn't tell you what the hell that means, but the address he uses is John Bernhardt. Maybe it's John Nathan or Nathan John Bernhardt. I have no idea what the name. Anyway, he's got a thread here based on, let's see, we've got to trace this all the way back, based on another thread or another news story. This one circulated by Kim Mai Cutler, who is a writer in her own right here. Well, let's see, Nathan/John Bernhardt saying, seems pretty clear at this point that the federal government is seizing medical supplies, because it's being reported that way, selling it, but he thinks what's happening, as I do, because also people are providing some reporting, at least on this, selling it to GOP-connected middlemen, intercepting, seizing, and outbidding the sales from those middlemen, and then selling the gear thus seized back to those same middlemen in a loop. And let's see. I don't know if we have any solid reporting on that last part, but it's what seems to be happening, given how much equipment is being bought, how many middlemen are operating in this space, and how many states keep insisting that things that they've bought and rebought are getting seized and not showing up. It's awfully difficult to see. Let's see. Okay. Well, here's how do you like this for an infinite loop? Okay. So, oops, I just closed it. So, as I said, the Wolfram tweet that caught my eye quoted Nathan Bernhardt. This is the great news bubble that we all live in here. Nathan Bernhardt's tweet quoting Kim Mai Cutler. It's Kim Mai or Kim May. I don't know. Kim Kim-MAI. You tell me how that might be pronounced. And she saying, finally, a national news story. And guess what news story it links back to? The Los Angeles Times story that I just had open here for sharing. Wolfram's summation of it, though, was that it should be blindingly obvious that A, this is happening, and B, it is evil beyond description. And in the next few days, every single Republican will tell you it's a hoax, it's not a story, and it's business as usual. We have, in fact, seen, I think somewhere in my pocket stories is a story that identifies the official I was speaking of, someone who's got a very nearly unpronounceable name, too, insisting this is the way things are supposed to work and have always worked, and I don't know. I don't think that's the case. As a matter of fact, here we go. This article has got it. The article in the Los Angeles Times is illustrated with a photo of Navy Rear Admiral John, Polowczyk, maybe we'll guess is the pronunciation of this, Polowczyk. He's been at the at the press conferences at the White House of late. This is the second picture I've seen of him appearing there. So I'm sure they introduced him and gave you the pronunciation of his name there. So if you happen to have been watching the press conference, you might be able to correct us on that. But Polowczyk is what it looks like to me. And, well, here's the story from Noam Levy at the Los Angeles Times. Although President Trump has directed states and hospitals to secure what supplies they can, the federal government is quietly seizing orders, leaving medical providers across the country in the dark about where the material is going and how they can get what they need to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. Hospital and clinic officials in 7 states described the seizures in interviews over the past week. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is not publicly reporting the acquisitions, despite the outlay of millions of dollars of taxpayer money, nor has the administration detailed how it decides which supplies to seize and where to reroute them. Officials who've had materials seized also say they've received no guidance from the government about how or if they will get access to the supplies they ordered. That has stoked concerns about how public funds are being spent, wouldn't that be nice to know, and whether the Trump administration is fairly distributing scarce medical supplies. That, too, we need to check on, because it's every indication that they're not. In order to have confidence in the distribution system, to know that it's being done in an equitable manner, you have to have transparency, said Dr. John Hick, an emergency physician at Hennepin Healthcare in Minnesota, who has helped develop national emergency preparedness standards through the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. The medical leaders on the front line of the fight to control the coronavirus and keep patients alive say they're grasping for explanations. We can't get any answers, said a California hospital official who asked not to be identified for fear of retaliation from the White House, which tells you all you need to know. In Florida, a large medical system saw an order for thermometers taken away. Florida. How do you believe that? And officials at a system in Massachusetts were unable to determine where its order of masks went. Are they stockpiling this stuff? Are they distributing it? We don't know, one official said. And are we going to ever get any of it back if we need supplies? It would be nice to know these things. Peace Health, a 10-hospital system in Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, had a shipment of testing supplies seized recently. Tests. That's interesting, too. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's incredibly frustrating, said Richard DiCarlo, the system's chief operating officer. We had put wheels in motion with testing and protective equipment to allow us to secure and protect our staff and our patients, he said. When testing went off the table, we had to come up with a whole new plan. Right? I mean, testing, widespread testing is the key to everything. Getting the economy back online, controlling the spread, making our social distancing and all the sacrifices it entails worth doing and much more effective if we can also test and track what's happening to people and make our ability to isolate particular individuals who might be at even greater risk, rather than just simply saying everybody stay home, because we know people aren't necessarily complying with all that. And given what we know about asymptomatic spread, it would be fantastic if we could test people, find out if they are asymptomatic carriers, and say, you in particular while everyone else in the country is saying, well, I will limit the number of times that I go to the grocery store in order to help suppress the spread, what if we were able to say, well, you've actually got it. You can't go even once every 2 weeks. Someone else is going to have to do your shopping for you. And you need to be particularly careful about who you come in contact with. That would make things much more effective. We would be much more on the South Korea model if we were able to do that. But we can't do it without testing. And as hard as the states and hospitals individually are working to try to get their hands on the tests that they need to make something like that happen, the tests are being seized before they get to the buyers. And then maybe being resold to the original buyers at an even higher price, paying both times in some cases in order to get a hand on maybe the same tests. By the way, bit of speculation that occurred to me overnight too. What a fantastic place to turn a buck if you are completely amoral as well. What about the possibility of introducing just outright fake tests into the market? Now, if we're hearing about the federal government seizing tests that have been bought because they had suspicions that they were fake and didn't want them distributed out in the market, that would be one thing. But that would be something you should be trumpeting from the rooftops. But no, this is something completely different. But in the meantime, we could in fact be falling victim to trafficking in fake tests, in fake or substandard PPE, right? Why not just take some stuff and stamp N95 on it and sell it at a premium price? Who would do such a thing? Well, unethical and amoral actors, mobsters, let's say even Russian mobsters. Who would be more interested in turning a quick profit in a killer market for even counterfeit goods, getting paid in, cash or the nearest equivalent, just a big fat check that someone hands off to you, no questions asked. You hand over, or maybe don't even hand over, or maybe you hand over the equipment knowing that the equipment is actually going to be seized back for you by the American federal government, and I don't know, maybe even possibly returned to you to sell again. But why would Russian mobsters be interested in turning a quick profit on selling off materials that would increase the chaos and distrust among Americans and maybe even lead to the loss of tens, hundreds of thousands of American lives and impact American national security, military readiness, economic power, etc. All things that, as it turns out, the Russian state wouldn't mind having happen at all. And while it used to be the case that for very little investment, they were able to make all of that happen, minus the tens or hundreds of thousands of American deaths, perhaps. But they were able to make all that happen for very little investment by meddling in the elections and screwing around with people on the internet. What if you were able to do it in a way that not only had all the same effects, but actually killed Americans and made money? It wasn't a matter of losing, only a little bit or investing only a minor amount versus investing in the military and taking the Americans on that way, but actually turning a profit. Well, I don't know why you would be able to talk anybody out of that. Is it happening? I don't know. But is the other stuff happening? Well, we also don't know about that. People say their goods are being seized by someone and we don't know what's happening to them. The door's open to just about anything. All right, let's see. I think we left off discussing the Peace Health system in the Pacific Northwest and how they have found out that the testing equipment that they bought has been taken off the table, and now they have to come up with a whole new plan for how they're going to move forward in that area. Although Peace Health doesn't have hospitals in the Seattle area where the first domestic coronavirus outbreak occurred, the system has had a steady stream of potentially infected patients who require testing and care by doctors and a nurse in full protective equipment. Trump and other White House officials, including his close advisor and son-in-law and fellow grifter Jared Kushner, have insisted that the federal government is using a data-driven approach to procure supplies and direct them where they are most needed. Now, of course, a data-driven approach, etc., national coordination, etc., would really argue for getting out there and saying states should stop trying to procure their own equipment. Hospital systems should stop trying to procure their own protective equipment. They should let the federal government buy up everything that there is and distribute it. But the fact that that instruction has never come is highly suspicious, in my view. In response to questions from the Times, a FEMA representative said the agency, working with the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Defense, has developed a system for identifying needed supplies from vendors and distributing them equitably. They're just not doing it. The representative said the agency factors in the populations of states and major metropolitan areas and the severity of the coronavirus outbreak in various locales. High transmission areas were prioritized, and allocations were based on population, not on quantities requested, the representative said. And that would be a sensible way of doing things. It's a great answer. It just might not describe the conditions on the ground. But the agency has refused to provide any details about how these determinations are made or why it is choosing to seize some supply orders and not others. Administration officials also will not say what supplies are going to what states. Using the Defense Production Act, a Korean War-era law that allows the president to compel the production of vital equipment in a national emergency, Trump last month ordered General Motors to produce ventilators to address shortfalls at hospitals. The law also empowers federal agencies to place orders for critical materials and to see that those get priority over orders from private companies or state and local governments. Experts say judicious use of this authority could help bring order to the medical supply market by routing critical materials, ventilators, masks, and other protective gear, from suppliers to the federal government and then to areas of greatest need, such as New York. Yet, there is little indication that federal officials are controlling the market, as hospitals, doctors, and others report paying exorbitant prices, which mobsters love, or resorting to unorthodox maneuvers, which mobsters love, to get what they need. I don't know whether they're going to mention this story in this write-up or not, but I'll make a note about to tell you a little bit about how the unusual or unorthodox maneuvers at least some people are having to make. Remind me, I'll get back to it. Hospital and health officials describe an opaque process in which federal officials sweep in without warning to expropriate supplies. Jose Camacho, who heads the Texas Association of Community Health Centers, said his group, Texas, was trying to purchase a small order of just 20,000 masks when his supplier reported that the order had been taken. Not like I just took your order and hang on, we're going to fill it, but the order of masks that I had for you, the masks that you ordered, were taken. Camacho was flabbergasted. Several of his member clinics, which as primary care centers are supposed to alleviate pressure on overburdened hospitals, are struggling to stay open amid woeful shortages of protective equipment. Everyone says you're supposed to be on your own, Camacho said, noting Trump's repeated admonition that states and local health systems cannot rely on Washington for supplies. Then to have this happen, you just sit there wondering what else you can do. You can't fight the federal government. Of course, the federal government's not supposed to fight you either, but that's what's happening. Somewhere, let's see, I think in Twitter I will be able to find a piece I retweeted earlier and then commented on. Yes, right. Reports by several out there, and this one I happened to grab from Jim Roberts, the NYC Jim that we turn to fairly frequently here on the show via Twitter. This is the story in the Chicago Sun-Times of how the Illinois Assistant Comptroller, Ellen Andres, raced north on I-55 with a check for $3.47 million. Why? He was on his way to, or she was on her way to meet a middleman who had some masks for them in a McDonald's parking lot to secure a supply of 1.5 million, supposedly, N95 respirator masks. An amazing story, he says, but not at all reminiscent of how a mobster might do business, right? You just bring me the money and I'll meet you in a McDonald's parking lot. This is the state of Illinois' assistant comptroller buying 1.5 million masks. It's extremely important they be verified, certified N95 respirator masks. But whatever, I got some boxes They fell off a truck. Give me a check. It's better than cash, but a check for $3.47 million. Quite honestly, no better than cash, honestly. Nobody gives a damn at the banks whose name is on the checks when it comes time to cash the things. But okay. Let me grab the Chicago Sun-Times piece about it, just so you know what's going on here. Mark Brown is the writer on this piece. Illinois adjusts on the fly to meet medical supply needs in a coronavirus Wild West. We keep hearing that term. To meet the deadline of a supplier and get 1.5 million potentially life-saving N95 masks, Illinois' assistant comptroller raced north on I-95 with a $3.4 million check. We heard about that. That was just described in the tweet. Let's see. In a state where the government usually operates on the basis of buy now, pay later, often much, much later, the emergency of the coronavirus pandemic has required a decidedly different approach. About 2 weeks ago, Illinois officials tracked down a supply of 1.5 million potentially life-saving N95 respirator masks in China through a middleman in the Chicago area and negotiated a deal to buy them. One day before they were expecting to complete the purchase, they got a call in the morning from the supplier informing them he had to get a check to the bank by 2 p.m. that day or the deal was off. Other bidders had surfaced. And what kind of situation is that? You got to pay me. I have to get a bank. I have a problem with my bank. I got to pay them by 2 p.m. that day. Or the deal is off. The bank doesn't care about the deal. They care about the money. What sort of situation are we talking about here? Realizing there was no way the supplier could get to Springfield and back by the deadline, Illinois Assistant Comptroller Ellen Andres jumped in her car and raced north on I-55 with a check for $3,469,600. From the other end, Jeffrey Poland, president of the Moving Concierge in Lamont, drove south. Poland isn't in the medical supply business, but he, quote, knows a guy. I'm not even making that up. That's the quote. He knows a guy, an old friend who specializes in working with China's factories. As they drove, Andres and Poland arranged to meet in the parking lot of a McDonald's restaurant just off the interstate in Dwight. They made the handoff there. Poland made it back to his bank with 20 minutes to spare. Illinois already has received part of the mask shipment. There's more on the way. So note what's happening here, by the way, is Ellen Andres has to drive north to Dwight, Illinois with a $3.4 million check. Poland will drive south and meet her in McDonald's and take the check. And what? Where is she going to put the 1.5 million masks? In her car? No, they won't fit. But don't worry, because the masks aren't even there. You just give me the money and I'll make sure they get to you. And then some masks showed up, and then here all it says is there's more on the way. Well, purportedly so. We'll see. I don't know whether there's been any follow-up on this one. This was dated, I think, April 3rd. It's possible the rest made it there by now. And we wouldn't have any way of knowing, but maybe not. Maybe it's been reported. That's just a taste of the Wild West world of emergency procurement taking place over the last several weeks as the state fights for equipment and supplies to protect frontline workers and patients in the battle against COVID-19. Most of that work is being performed by Governor J.B. Pritzker's administration through a rapid procurement strike team. That makes it sound like it's legit, right? Pulling together procurement specialists from around the state government under the auspices of the Illinois Emergency Management Agency. As Pritzker has made clear at his daily briefings, it's an effort made all the more difficult by the absence of a strong, coordinated White House response. That's left Illinois competing against other states, foreign nations, and even our own federal government, and maybe mobsters, for the same material. They're all looking for what have come to be known as PPE, personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, gowns, face shields, plus coronavirus testing kits and swabs, and most prized of all, ventilators to help those most seriously ill keep breathing. There's a separate team working just on ventilators, said Deputy Governor Christian Mitchell, who's overseeing the procurement efforts for Pritzker. When they find what they need, they have to move immediately to complete the purchase before losing out to another bidder, even as the competition causes prices to jump to levels that would have been ridiculous just a month ago. Keep in mind that all this is taking place in an environment in which Mitchell said his people are being told agents of foreign governments are in China with cash to make purchases directly from factories to get supplies for themselves, which of course they're doing because the Americans are doing the same, and they have to compete, I guess. A few days after Andrus's race to Dwight, another comptroller's office employee, Cortez Gillespie, was able to stay under the speed limit, luckily, as he drove to a Road Ranger gas station near, I'm going to guess, Minonk, M-I-N-O-N-K, in central Illinois, to hand off 2 more checks totaling $3.7 million. 2 checks, interesting, to a representative of a Rockford supply company, beating a noon deadline for the purchase of additional masks and safety glasses. What is it with these deadlines? Since then, State Comptroller Susana Mendoza said her office has been working with Illinois Treasurer Michael Frericks to get payments out more seamlessly through wire transfers when necessary, even less traceable, less accountability. A procedure rarely used in state government to pay vendors because, F it, all the money's gone. Frericks says he also has had to intervene with banks to convince them to immediately honor the warrants, and that's in quotes there, that Illinois uses to pay its bills, and not wait a week for the funds to clear. A warrant authorizes payment on demand and can be issued only if the state has the money to cover it. You're seeing all these transactions that are abnormal for ridiculous amounts of money, said Mendoza, noting that the race to get money out has to be balanced with the need to protect the state from being defrauded. Yes. Mitchell said the procurement team is screening all of its leads, trying to sort the wheat from the chaff as best we can. The greatest challenge, he said, is finding ventilators. That's where the bidding war is the hottest and the most cutthroat, Mitchell said. He said there is little hope that the state will have the ventilators it needs before the expected crush hits Chicago hospitals late this month. The saddest part is even when we find the supplies we need, that will mean someone in another state will likely have to do without. Yeah, and that is pretty sad. That's even goes beside the point, really. But what's happening here with states seeing their shipments grabbed and having to race out to McDonald's parking lots with checks to, meet me by noon or you're screwed. I'm not going to give you the whatever it is you're looking for, the masks, the gloves, the other PPE, the tests. Imagine if, some of this was familiar practice to mobsters, and that mobsters were, in fact, circulating regular masks that they just stamped with N95. Or, hell, did anybody even open the box? Are we sure that there's actually N95 masks in there? Nobody knows because the boxes weren't even there. Just give me the money and I'll drive away, and yeah, you'll get what you asked for. It sounds like a great way to do this procurement. And meanwhile, the federal government is encouraging this and saying this is the way it's always worked, which is amazing and probably also not actually true. Let's see. I don't even know. Again, there's so many stories that are buried, but I feel like I want to trace this line of stories down here. And I think this helps add to the more complete picture. A Politico magazine piece here from Garrett Graff. Trump broke the agencies that were supposed to stop the COVID-19 epidemic. The government agencies designed to protect us are riddled with vacancies and temporary officials, acting officials, as we know here, using our sound effects, right? Everybody's acting. Which, by the way, thought occurred to me the other day as I was reading that the acting Secretary of the Navy, the acting Secretary of the Navy, who was just such a jackass on board the Teddy Roosevelt, and by the way, I saw it described by one journalist as the facts being that the text of his speech leaked somehow into the public domain. There was no leak. He gave the speech over the public address system, and somebody recorded it. It was meant for public consumption. That's what public address systems are all about. Although arguably you could say, well, it was for the public on board the ship. But yeah, wasn't much of a leak. Anyway, Yes, the acting Secretary of the Navy has been replaced on an acting basis by the acting Undersecretary of the Army. They just moved him over. And as it turns out, interestingly enough, it was a Navy man working as acting Undersecretary of the Army, which, I don't know, presumably, I guess, would be okay. I'm not in any position to object. But an acting moving into another acting's position as acting as well, and I wondered whether maybe this is a great euphemism we could be using to cover up for other deficiencies. Maybe the problem that all the immigrants, documented or otherwise, are having is that they're not claiming to be acting citizens, and everyone would leave them alone if that were the case, because everyone knows being acting is normal. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's jump back in here. I'm thinking that maybe the last segment might be eaten up by reading the bulk of this Politico piece, and not exactly in the way I would want to spend it. But this is definitely an important piece for figuring out just how broken our preparedness system was and our response system was. But I think we actually have gotten a pretty good idea of how and why, given how much we've been poking fun at the idea of everybody being and acting everything. At some point, it deprives the government of the necessary level of expertise and accountability, and results in breakdowns like this. And it's pretty well laid out, it appears, in my quick skim of the Politico piece. But time being short, maybe we'll come back to this if I can digest it off the air and perhaps summarize it a little bit better in the near future. But there's so many other things that I need to scroll back down and get around to. One, of course, our acting Navy Secretary has reportedly offered his resignation. I don't know whether it's become effective or not, but that was news, mentioned it earlier. A number of other things along the way to note. Anything else I need to just sort of call out real quick before I scroll all the way down here? Some interesting information, again, needs a little bit more digestion perhaps, about what might be happening behind the scenes that might actually give some legal status to what FEMA and other emergency operators are doing with respect to some of these seizures. But again, this is something I think we need to do some more reading on, digest, and clear up. If we get a chance, we can double back on it. Here's some other explanations, too, about what's been going on the piracy end of things, where American operators, or maybe American operators, maybe not, are snapping up equipment as it leaves factories in China, and as it's on the tarmac being loaded onto planes. We mentioned the story the other day of some allegedly American operators showing up on the tarmac in Shanghai airport and offering to pay 3 times what the then current buyer, France, was paying for some masks that were outbound from China. This might give us some insight into why American operators were doing this, and possibly where they got the idea, and possibly even, maybe, in some minds, I don't know whether we'd all agree, justification for doing all this, besides, well, we're Americans and we want America to get these supplies. I saw the tweet the other day that I grabbed here by Josh Rogan. Josh Rogan, Washington Post reporter, who says, who puts it this way: U.S. companies are finding out they don't own their factories in China. Although, China being a communist country, I guess that should have been more obvious. But I guess it doesn't always occur to people when they outsource their manufacturing concerns to China, either completely or just in part, that you're working with a system in which it's not entirely clear all the time who owns everything. Until it gets into your hands in the United States, we don't know, what does it mean to own anything like that in a communist country. When they tried to export their medical equipment, the Chinese government stopped them. And the linked article here is to a New York Post piece. New York Post, not really the most trustworthy of all sources necessarily, but I guess a little bit less likely to sensationalize from the right-wing point of view than, say, the Daily News. But okay, let's dive into this one to see what we find here. This was very interesting to me. Trump administration weighs legal action over alleged Chinese hoarding of PPE. This puts a little bit of a different spin on things. And I thought we would at least throw it out for our consideration here. Ebony Bowden and Bruce Golding, the reporters on this piece from April 5th. Leading U.S. manufacturers of medical safety gear, and in this case, I think we eventually get around to hearing about 3M in this. 3M, who Trump has been so furious with for various reasons, and whose masks, in some cases ordered by the Canadian government and the Canadian provincial governments, have been, the exports of which have been blocked by our American federal government, causing some tremendous tensions there. Leading U.S. manufacturers of medical safety gear told the White House that China prohibited them from exporting their products from the country as the coronavirus pandemic mounted, even as Beijing was trying to, quote, corner the world market in personal protective equipment, the Post has learned. So there's two things going on here. If there's first, of course, as the coronavirus pandemic builds around the world, other countries are in need of PPE in order to get prepared as best they can be, or to catch up on their lack of preparedness as the disease spreads to them, as was the case here in the United States. But early on, of course, the Chinese could be perhaps, it could be forgiven, certainly, if you're trying to be forgiving and understanding, for prohibiting the export of all these materials when they were dealing with the crisis firsthand, right? This stuff is being, we're doing that here now, right? Trump is saying, well, those masks that are produced by 3M here in the United States, if there's already masks sitting here in the United States and we have tremendous need for them, don't send them to Canada, keep them here and use them. Not exactly fair, of course, and not the free and open market we always say we're competing in and we want other countries to adopt. But there you have it. You can see this sort of reactionary moment where they say, well, we have need of it here. Well, the Chinese would feel the same way. We have need of it right here. But at some point, of course, they've bent their curve downward and we're still playing catch up. But it is entirely possible that the Chinese government could have realized, well, it's not so much that we need every mask we can get here, as it is the case that every country needs every mask they can get there, and these things are sitting here in China. We could corner the market on the most valuable material the world, the most valuable material in the world at the moment, this protective equipment that Americans think they owned because they paid to lease the factories here in China to produce, but, possession being 9/10 of the law and China not caring about any of the tenths of the law in many cases, let's just seize them, not because we need it, but because we can control the world if we control this stuff. Is that what's going on? Let's continue with the Post's reporting here. Now the Trump administration is weighing legal action against China, that'll help right away, over its alleged actions, a lawyer for President Trump said Sunday. And we don't know what kind of, well, let's see if we can figure out who that is. A person who should have nothing to do with this, of course. Who else would be? In criminal law, compare this to the levels that we have for murder. Now, that sounds pretty dramatic, right? But okay, maybe now you're talking. We accuse the Trump administration of having blood on its hands for its failure to respond, right? Why not? In criminal law, compare this to the levels of what? I don't know, that we have for murder. Says who? Says Jenna Ellis. Who's that? A senior legal advisor to Trump's re-election campaign, right? Not a senior legal advisor to the Trump White House, who does have a hand in this, but the Trump's re-election campaign, who should be entirely silent and invisible on this, but isn't. But okay, she has a point. People are dying when you have intentional, cold-blooded, premeditated action like you have with China. Now we know why the election people are doing this. This would be considered first-degree murder. It's absolutely not first-degree murder for Donald Trump to be doing this or Jared Kushner to be seizing equipment from states. But when China does it, that's murder, and we like that comparison, and we're going to use it. Okay, sure. Let's see. Ellis said, the options under consideration, and how does she know? Why is the campaign lawyer handling this? She'd absolutely not be handling this whatsoever. The greatest distance possible between them. But no. Ellis said the options under consideration include filing a complaint with the European Court of Human Rights, which, of course, you don't believe in because you hate international law, or working through the United Nations, which Trump wants to bomb and drive out of New York. Executives from 3M and Honeywell told U.S. officials that the Chinese government in January began blocking exports of N95 respirators, booties, funny, always laugh at, well, okay, it can't be 12 years old all the time, N95 respirators, booties, gloves, and other supplies produced by their factories in China, according to a senior White House official. Now we're back to the White House, not the campaign. China paid the manufacturers their standard wholesale rates, but prohibited the vital items from being sold to anyone else, the official said. And I don't know how things work there in China. Maybe it is a normal matter, of course, that leased factories produce something, but in order to, maintain the communist system, the Chinese government, in effect, buys all of the output of these factories with the idea that there's an agreement in place to resell them, perhaps at a greater price. That would be, that's their system, whatever. Resell them to American companies or other international exporters of this stuff. But in the first instance, the government actually owns the output of their own factories. Not the way it works here, but it's a communist country. Maybe that's really the way they do things. China says they paid the standard wholesale rates to the factories, but then just put a stop on the movement of these things, I guess, as they think is their right. Around the same time that China cracked down on PPE exports, official data posted online shows that it imported 2.46 billion pieces of epidemic prevention and control materials between January 24th and February 29th, the White House official said. The gear, valued at nearly $1.2 billion, included more than 2 billion masks and more than 25 million protective clothing items that came from countries in the European Union, as well as Australia, Brazil, and Cambodia, the official said. Data from China's own customs agency points to an attempt to corner the world market in PPE, like gloves, goggles, and masks, through massive increased purchases, even as China, the world's largest PPE manufacturer, was restricting exports, the official said. Of course, again, reminder, this is between January 24th and February 29th, when much of the rest of the world is doing nothing and uninterested at all in building up its own stockpiles of PPE, because we just think this is a Chinese problem. They were more than happy, I'm sure, to sell, possibly at inflated prices, PPE from around the world to China, where they had a pretty good reason for actually acquiring all of it, even though they're a big manufacturer of it. For one thing, the manufactured equipment was at least technically spoken for elsewhere before they seized it. And two, they were the ones and the only ones at that time, I guess right up until, I guess by late January, we had one case. And remember, we were going to have zero soon. And Japan and South Korea had certainly been dealing with it, but there was a good case for keeping the bulk of this PPE in China and in Asia at that time, even though we really should have been preparing ourselves for the pandemic reaching our shores. Last week, Trump invoked the Defense Production Act, allegedly, to order St. Paul, Minnesota-based 3M to prioritize production of N95 respirators for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Michael Wessel, a founding member of the Federal U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, confirmed the situation and said the Chinese maneuvering had left American hospitals starved of PPE to fight this crisis. We understand that China has engaged in policies to try and not only develop its own capabilities, but to do so at the expense of producers around the world, said Wessel, formerly a top staffer to ex-U.S. Representative Dick Gephardt of Missouri, a Democrat, for those of you who might not remember or have questions in your mind. But that's interesting. So interesting the way he puts it, that they were going to not only develop its own capabilities, but do so at the expense of producers around the world. Except the producers weren't around the world. They were in China. They were their producers, though they did buy some equipment from elsewhere. At a time when demand was rising to deal with the crisis, China was marshaling all of the products for its own use. Wessel said that some of China's actions are probably illegal, but to bring cases when you're in the middle of a crisis does little good for the patients who are in the hospital on ventilators and might not have been there had they had access to PPE. Wessel also said that while China had recently begun easing exports of PPE, they're using it for soft power, essentially saying it's a humanitarian gesture, they are saying this, to try to curry goodwill with American people when some of the problems we're facing are the direct result of Chinese policies. Seems like a valid point. Christian Whitten, W-H-I-T-O-N, a former senior diplomacy and trade advisor to the George W. Bush and Trump administrations, described Chinese control of PPE as political warfare. It looks like a coordinated effort between the Chinese government and industry, and that's always going to be a coordinated effort. It's a communist country. But okay. Looks like a coordinated effort where they used to be nothing but exporters, yes, of the stuff, but now they turned around and they're importing it while banning all exports, said Whitten, now a senior fellow for strategy and trade at the Center for the National Interest. What is most interesting to me when we get through this crisis, I think there's rage, not just concern, but rage in Congress about China, certainly with Tom Cotton, and from the American people that China is culpable one way or the other, he added. Be careful with that. Honeywell said in a statement, for the majority of the first quarter, China was experiencing the most acute effects of the COVID-19 crisis, so all the masks from the facility in question were utilized for local consumption. Production at the facility in question remained under Honeywell management's control throughout the coronavirus outbreak. I have doubts about that, but that's what they have to say. 3M did not respond to requests for comment on Sunday, but in a statement issued last week, noted that it had just, quote, secured approval from China to export to the U.S. 10 million N95 respirators manufactured by 3M in China. Steve Bannon, making an appearance here, a former White House chief strategist under Trump and the host of the podcast, why plug it? Do you care? But here's what he's up to these days. He's now hosting a podcast called War Room Pandemic. Like War Room, pandemic. Everyone listen to this idiot. Ready? Well, he said the behavior of the Chinese government was equivalent to a biological Chernobyl, which is actually what's happening here in the United States and is actually his boy Trump's fault. But whatever. He's going to blame it on the Chinese because that's what that's what he gets paid for. And who's paying, by the way? The same people that understood this virus had human-to-human transmission and was going to be a pandemic were at the same time vacuuming up every piece of PPE from the U.S., Brazil, and Europe, said Bannon, who formerly lived in Shanghai, did we ever hear about this one, when he ran on an online gaming company. They're at war with the West. This story shows the world what Chinese citizens are dealing with, he said. The Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. didn't respond to a request for comment. So, all right, that manifests itself in trying to call it the Chinese virus, et cetera, et cetera. But this is actually a separate arm of the same story. Here's Steve Bannon trying to insist that that we knew nothing about this, when in fact, of course, they said they knew that it was human to human and it was going to be a pandemic, and they're vacuuming up every piece of PPE. But at the same time, our intelligence agencies were warning Trump, this is going to be a pandemic, and the Chinese are vacuuming up every piece of PPE that they can get. What do you want to do about it? And he said, I want to go play golf. I want to have rallies. I don't want to do anything. And there's money to be made. It's great that they're buying stuff from the U.S. Fantastic. Sell everything we can. Until, of course, it became too late. And, well, what are you going to do? Well, the answer is, I guess you show up in Shanghai, and when they finally do agree to export some of this stuff, you try and grab it up from the French and the Germans, saying, well, it was supposed to be ours in the first place, but it was stolen by the Chinese the first time, so we're just stealing what was stolen from us, which isn't stealing, or something like that. And in the meantime, that's just step one in our Project Air Bridge, which I keep saying online is just War Dogs, but for PPE. Have you all seen War Dogs? Another tweet of mine yesterday. I asked you, everybody, have we all seen the movie War Dogs? Because if not, you're seeing it now. It's happening right in front of you. Quick synopsis of the plot of that movie if you haven't had the chance to see it, and you might find it entertaining, real interesting. Story of, I guess based on a true story, I guess. I don't know how faithful it is to the actual story, but the U.S. government at an early point in the Iraq War, I had first thought it was maybe Afghanistan, but it turns out, I think in one of the plot synopses I read was the Iraq War, needed supplies, obviously, but they were looking for armaments, and in fact, in this case, ammunition. They needed, billions and billions of rounds of ammunition supplied to them, and there was a Pentagon program opening up procurement for the military operations worth, billions, perhaps trillions of dollars, opening up to small businesses and minority-owned businesses, all the things that we like to do with our contracting as a government. And so there was this tremendous opportunity for people, small business operators, to jump in. And as usual, it ends up getting exploited by new entrants into the market. And it's basically two guys who had been friends in high school, one of whom is, rather aimlessly moving from get-rich-quick scheme to get-rich-quick scheme while working as a masseuse, as I understand it. Anyway, meets up with one of his old high school friends who likewise is moving from scheme to scheme, but is doing significantly better working with his dad. I think they're arms dealers, essentially. Not, great big billionaire international arms dealers necessarily, but selling guns. So he had some kind of in with this stuff. And they basically figured out, well, if we file the right paperwork, we can make a bid. Just lowball everybody, because what do we care? We're just a shoestring operation. It's just the two of us. And with outsourcing being all the rage these days, let's bid on supplying 1 billion rounds of ammunition or whatever it was to the U.S. government for less than everybody else. The major defense contractors are going to charge an arm and a leg, and we can undercut them. And they did, and they got awarded the contract, and then they were like, what the hell are we going to get 1 billion rounds of ammunition? Basically, without too much in the way of, all right, it's going to spoil the whole thing. But you should watch it anyway. But they essentially figure out, all right, where are we going to get these rounds of ammunition? Who's got access to this kind of stockpile? And to no one's surprise, it turns out to be basically Eastern European, former Soviet bloc mobsters have got access to this ammunition, some of which is old, expired Soviet ammunition, some of which is Chinese in origin, which also shouldn't surprise anyone. Neither of which I think comply, as I recall from the story, with the American protocols and requirements to fulfill the contract. So they actually spend the bulk of their time trying to arrange for the logistics of unpacking all of this ammunition from boxes that would identify it as being from sources that would be non-compliant or illegal, and putting them into containers that would make it look like they had been legitimately acquired. And of course, once you are skirting the rules that way and doing so in cooperation and in business cooperation with Eastern European mobsters, you can understand that the situation very quickly gets less and less ethical and spins more and more out of control. And these guys, just to extricate themselves from this one single transaction, are doing God knows what to get things done and to save their own lives at the same time. So basically, you're just seeing the same thing happen now with PPE. That Jared Kushner's friends from management class at Harvard, where he never belonged in the first place, are finding out that if you file the right paperwork, the fact that you've never worked in, medical PPE should be of no interest to anyone. If you have any experience at all or no experience but have a telephone and are willing to call numbers in China and do your best to try to say, well, if I pay you $1 billion, will you export this stuff to Chicago? That's enough. And you can go ahead and make money that way. And if it's not enough money for you, how about if you get paid for having that stuff shipped out of China and then we seize it before it gets to Chicago and give it back to you? And you can register as Blue Flame Medical LLC in Delaware or wherever, and we'll steal it and hand you back the same masks, and you can sell them twice, thereby ensuring a profit for you. War dogs, but for PPE. It's actually pretty easy, and at this moment, as we learned from Illinois and its assistant comptrollers, nobody has the time to check whether or not it's a legitimate operation and whether or not it's really wise to drive to a McDonald's parking lot with a $3.4 million check in exchange for the promise of what might possibly be N95 masks, but could be boxes of sawdust for all we know, because they're not even there in the parking lot where you're handing over the check. Is there any opportunity for stealing money in a situation like this? And once again, why worry about these things, right? What are the odds that an American president would agree to operate under conditions that would enable, let's say, Russian mobsters to make a killing selling counterfeit tests and masks to people who are desperate and willing to hand over $3.4 million checks in parking lots for the promise of getting boxes later? Why would an American president be interested in empowering Russian mobs that way, right? Except for the fact that he's already interested in empowering Russian mobs in so many other areas that why not throw this one in too? And will I get a cut? I will, yes. Yeah, but what about my obligation to protect the American people? Oh yeah, after that, I don't care. Forgot about that. Well, it would be much more difficult to get a normal American president to agree to something like this than to get this one to agree. And therein lies the problem. Okay. Oh, I forgot to throw in there, maybe I'll just do this here in our last minute or two. Another of the countries that has had its equipment waylaid by American pirates, and these guys know pirates when they see them, although they're not using the P word the way the Germans are. Barbados, of all places. You can't hide your piracy from the people of Barbados. They know about it. The Miami Herald reports this one, and I'll give you at least the headline before moving on to another important point about it, or interesting point anyway. Jacqueline Charles writes, Barbados accuses U.S. of blocking ventilators for coronavirus, then walks back the allegation. We'll see what that's all about. But for a moment there anyway, back on April 6th, Barbados was the latest country, I confuse the two of them so often, to accuse the United States of blocking it from acquiring critical medical equipment for fighting COVID-19. You all know, of course, what the disease is. I don't have to tell you that. In a live broadcast on a national briefing Sunday, Health Minister Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Bostick said that 20 ventilators purchased by a philanthropist had been seized in the U.S., but not long after stories from island media outlets went online detailing his comments, the Daily Nation in Barbados published an article walking back Bostick's allegation. The paper reported that hours after Bostick made the claim during a live broadcast and after interview requests from the Miami Herald, he told them that the seize might not have been the correct word. I don't know what he thinks it really was, the correct word, but I wonder if it had anything to do with who the philanthropist was who was behind this. I was wondering whether this would be able to get reversed based on the fame connection. I'll give you this quick report here from, where are we? Revolt.tv. No idea exactly what they're about, but they appear to be sort of an entertainment outlet. Here's the headline that might explain the whole thing. Rihanna to purchase $700,000 worth of ventilators for Barbados. Rihanna is lending a helping hand to her native country amid COVID-19. That dated March 21st, and I was wondering whether Rihanna had gotten word whether or not the ventilators she ordered for Barbados had actually made it there. It seems those were the very same ventilators seized by somebody under some authority in the United States. And I thought, what a perfect opportunity with a celebrity, a mega celebrity involved in this to actually shine some light on this thing. But the question is, would she want to spend her time shining light on it, or would she want to spend her time fixing the situation so the people in Barbados got the help they needed? And it's hard to blame her if she chose the latter rather than the former. That may or may not have been what happened here, but I just wanted to put that one on your radar. Now it's time for Justice Putnam to put other things on your radar from around the country and around the world, all in the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Let's go with the international side here. The Swiss Army's biggest call-up since World War II. Thousands of soldiers have been sent to support health workers in the fight against the pandemic. And a prominent Chinese Communist Party member who criticized Xi Jinping's handling of the pandemic is being investigated on suspicion of a severe violation of discipline and law. All next.